My name is Kat Buxton. I work for Cedar Circle Farm, which is in East Thetford, about 10 miles up the river, Connecticut River from here. And Cedar Circle Farm is a part of the Vermont Right to Know Coalition. The coalition is a collaborative partnership between NOFA Vermont, which is the Northeast Organic Farmers Association of Vermont, VPIRD, which is the Vermont Public Research Interest Group, Rural Vermont, and Cedar Circle Farm. I have with me Dave Rogers, who is the policy advisor to NOFA Vermont, and he's here to help back up some of those more policy-oriented questions and science and all the other stuff that I'm not that good on. We've been working on this bill for about 3 years. We started out with a different bill number. The way the legislature works in Vermont is we have what's called a biennium, which means that a bill can be alive for 2 years. Our legislative session runs from January to May, and then there's a big break until the next January. So the first year we introduced a piece of legislation. It didn't really go anywhere. It sat in the House Ag Committee, and then sometime in April they called a public hearing. About 400 people showed up at the State House that night and testified all in favor of the bill, and that really kind of shook the State House and made them realize how important this was to people. The committee then decided to take it up. It became H112 in 2013. It's the bill number. It took that whole legislative session to get through the House, which it passed with a 99-42 vote. So that was great, and we were the first state to pass a piece of legislation through an entire body of the government at that time. Then, in January of this year, 2014, our legislature took it up pretty quickly. There was very little delay because they have heard from more Vermonters on this issue than any issue since civil unions. So everyone pretty much knows about this and is pretty excited about it and vote. And we can't let up now. This year, it was taken up by the Senate Ag Committee. In about a month after hearing it, they passed it out of committee unanimously. They made a lot of changes to the bill. It then went to the Judiciary Committee, where last Thursday it passed out of that committee unanimously with a 5-0 vote. They strengthened the bill immensely. It was already a strong bill, and now it's a really, really strong bill. And I'm really pleased to share with you that I just got a text about a half an hour ago that today the bill passed out of the Senate Appropriations Committee with a vote of 7-0. So, yeah, very exciting. So the next step is we go to the Senate floor, and that's next week. We don't have a date yet. They'll post the schedule. They usually try and post the schedule on Fridays for the coming week, and those schedules are available on the legislative website, which is right at the top of Dave's head here. And so you can go there and find it, or you can follow us on Facebook if you're that kind of person, and we will post. That's me on the other side of Facebook usually. So this is the face
on the
other side of the book. Yeah, I'm usually the one posting. And I try to keep you up to date there on where the committees are. And the world is watching us. I mean, everyone is looking at Vermont because we're about to be the first state to pass a law to label mandatory labeling of GMOs that will actually go into effect. 2 other states have passed laws. Connecticut and Maine did so. Both passed laws with something called a trigger. A trigger is a set of circumstances which you need to happen before the bill goes into effect. Even though both bills were signed by the governors, their triggers call for roughly, each one's a little bit different, but only slightly, 5 states, all from the Northeast, one of which touches the state with a combined population of 20 million people. So if you know your geography and demographics at all, you know that that has to mean New York. And the legislation, there is legislation in New York, but it's going slowly. And as you might imagine, trying to pass something in a state that has New York State and New York City as a part of its population, it's like 2 different countries. So everything takes a little bit longer there.
A lot of biotech industry.
A lot of biotech industry. Yeah, they've actually been doing GE trees in the Adirondacks for like 15 years.
Taking genetic trees.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that too in the Amazon.
In short, I don't want to get too bogged down on that, but in short, they genetically engineer trees to make the lignins softer. the lignins are the part of the tree that would last longer, and I guess it helps with the pulp trees, I think is what they're, you know. Yeah, they're also experimenting with disease resistance and.
Yeah, but this is not going to eventually overthrow the ecosystem.
Oh, I would think so, yeah, I would think so, there's a lot of.
Ecosystem's been the way it's been for millions of years, and now you're going in there and you're altering it, so that's going to offset everything else.
Yeah, we humans are incredibly egotistical. It's amazing what we think we know. And what we don't know and don't even give that any heed. So we're gonna start off the evening with a slideshow, and I want to invite you to stop and ask questions at any point through the slideshow. Here, I'm trying to talk about the whole big picture of genetically engineered food, which is a very large issue. Biotechnology is a really large issue, and it's a science. And I'm not here to judge one way or another whether biotechnology is a good or bad thing. We're here to talk about biotechnology in the context of food that we eat. So, we start off with what is genetic engineering? I think that in order to understand how we've gotten to where we are now and why we want labels on food, you first need to understand the basics of genetic engineering. And I think one of the most common points of confusion is what's the difference between a genetically engineered food and one that has been traditionally bred, or genetically engineered seed and one that's been traditionally bred. And there's a lot of misinformation out there on purpose about this. That's the opposition. It's you know, a good way to confuse, a good way to win is to confuse people. Just muddy everything up. So, is there anybody here who feels like you know the difference between genetically engineered seeds and traditional breeding enough that you want to raise your hand and say what those are? Not you did.
I'm too tired.
Yeah.
The traditional hybrid seeds are cross-pollinated and otherwise naturally modified, if you want to use the word, changed over the years, over many years, but they're done in a natural way without inserting genes from one species into another species, which is what makes something genetically engineered or genetically modified.
Yes, you nailed it. So yeah, the big difference is basically crossing the species barrier. So you can do traditional breeding and genetic engineering in a laboratory. Both can be done under controlled situations. But in the field, through natural circumstances, genetic engineering can't happen. You need a laboratory and you need manual insertion of genes. It can be from plant to plant, it can be from bacteria to plant, it can be from fish to plant. You can cross those species barriers. Doesn't mean that all GMOs are crossing species barriers, but it certainly breaks down that species barrier so that you could potentially cross a cat and a carrot, or a tomato and salmon, which has been done, or a salmon gene and strawberry, so on and so forth.
So one of the most dramatic examples of this is when scientists took a gene from the glowworm, that goes in the dark, and they were able to take the gene that is responsible for the production of the chemical that actually produces the glowing, this bioluminescence, and they put it into tobacco plant. So tobacco plant glows in the dark. They put it into goldfish. They put it into mice. And so, to see a mouse that glows in the dark gives you a sense of the power here. And the ability to isolate specific genes that do specific things, and then to transfer those traits to something that would never, ever, in a billion years of evolution, come to acquire that trait. So it's very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm. And really interesting, but I don't want to eat it. And there, as we'll learn more in this presentation, the studies to prove the safety of these foods for humans and also for the environment have not been done in a reasonable fashion. Anything that has been done has only been done by the industry that makes these products. And we'll go into a little more detail on that. So we know what genetic engineering is. What are GMOs? Well, those are genetically modified organisms. Genetic engineering is the science. Biotechnology is the science. Genetic engineering is what they do to seeds. GMOs are the products that are grown out of those seeds and turned into foodstuff. There are lots of terms that are thrown out. There's GE, there's genetic engineering, there's GM, there's genetic modification, there's GMOs. They're all the same thing. This is more of the confusion. How many ways can we call this? And then people will think we're talking about something else. It's all biotechnology, and all of those terms that I just mentioned are used to describe food products, and that's typically how we think of them. There are medicines, there are other things that are happening with this technology that we're not going to cover today, and our labeling bill in Vermont does not cover either. So GMOs are foods or products that are created by these seeds or by these animals that have had their DNA manually manipulated in a laboratory. And what's the big difference? Well, genetic engineering can only occur in a laboratory. Traditional breeding only occurs between closely related forms. In traditional breeding, you can't cross the fish and the strawberry. You just can't do it. It's not going to happen. You can cross a plant and a plant, but there are barriers there too. You can't cross any plant with any plant. You got to stay within families. So there are certain natural barriers that have been set up in nature that can be completely obliterated by genetic engineering. So why are we doing this? Why are they doing this? Herbicide resistance, systemic insecticides, development of specific traits, patents, power, control, and money. To explain these a little bit more, the two main kinds of crops that you will see and that you've heard about are herbicide-resistant crops, otherwise known as Roundup-Ready crops, and systemic insecticide crops, which are often called BT crops. We'll start with the first one. Herbicide-resistant crops, or Roundup-Ready crops, are the most popular kind. Roundup is a product. It's a product created by Monsanto. It's an herbicide. You can buy it for your backyard. They have huge tanks of it. They spray it on roadsides. You know, it's used all over the place as an herbicide and has been for quite a long time. And its primary ingredient is glyphosate. There are other herbicides that are used in this herbicide resistance technology, but glyphosate is the most common one. And Roundup-Ready crops were the icebreaker. They were the groundbreaking thing, and we're eating them. What happens with these crops is they've manipulated the genes so that the plant is resistant to the herbicide. It's unaffected when it's sprayed with herbicide. To give you a visual, here in Vermont, you see corn growing all over the place. And that's typically dairy corn. It's corn for feed for dairy cattle. 96% of the corn in Vermont is genetically engineered. 96%. In 2003, that was not the case. Very few acres. But now, it's a very different story. So that also kind of gives you a sense of the timeline and the intensity with which this has been pushed. When you drive up and down the roads, and it's coming up here soon, I know some farmers are seeding corn today, which is kind of amazing because there was just snow last week, but you seed your corn, and within about 14 days you get a sprout, and it looks just like a piece of grass, because corn is a grass. And you know, you'll see them laid out in a field, all in lines, little pieces of grass sticking up, and the weeds will start to come up, because that's the way it happens when we cultivate soil. We spin the soil, all the seeds that were in there from last year's weeds, or many years worth of weeds, surface to the top, and they begin to sprout under the right temperature and moisture conditions. So when that starts to happen, the farmers start to worry, because you know, the weeds could, and often do, of course, grow a lot faster than the corn and overpower it, so they could lose their crops. So weeds are a pest. It's a pressure that farmers are constantly battling, whether you're organic, conventional, genetically engineered, or whatever. Weeds are, it's a big part of what we do, is kill plants as farmers. But So at that point, when the corn is about this tall, you can come out with your glyphosate or your Roundup and you can spray. Blanket spray. And in fact, on the 10,000 acre farms, that's exactly what they do, is they come out with these really long tubes on either side of a tractor and they spray huge amounts. Or you can fly overhead in an airplane and spray overhead as well and just dump glyphosate out. And what it does is it kills every single thing in the field, everything that's green except for that crop. And in the case of this story that I'm telling, except for that corn. So everything's dead except for the corn. And the glyphosate persists in the soil for quite a while. So any of those remaining weed seeds that would surface to the top aren't going to sprout because they have been soaked with an herbicide to prevent them from growing. Since the introduction of herbicide-resistant crops in this country, or in the world, there has been a 300% increase in the use of glyphosate or Roundup. 300% increase. Glyphosate is it's a chelation agent. It originally came to us through the mining industry. And the mining industry used it because it pulls. That's what chelating is. It's a pulling. It latches to minerals and it pulls it out. So the function of it as an herbicide in soil is it ties up the minerals in soil, it pulls them and makes them unavailable to plants. And the plants basically starve to death because they can't eat. They can't assimilate any nutrients. So that's the function of glyphosate with plants. Now if you take that understanding of the function of glyphosate and apply it to the human body, I'm not quite sure what that does. That needs to be studied. But it's a fairly simple concept, I think, but it does need more studying. So that's herbicide resistance. Now glyphosate is one thing, and it's the most common thing, but they've now started, because plants evolve very quickly, and they develop a resistance to this glyphosate, they now are genetically engineering these plants with stronger herbicides. And the most recent one that I'm aware of is 2,4-D. 2,4-D is a component of Agent Orange. So that's herbicide resistance. Let me just say that, there's going to be some good news along the way too, so it's going to be a little depressing for a little while, but this is all a good thing we're doing. So I just saw a bunch of heads sort of like, I was like, oh. So systemic insecticides are the next thing we're going to talk about. Those are the other kind of big crop, and those are often called BT crops. Those are crops that are built or genetically engineered, their DNA has been manipulated to contain an insecticide inside every single cell of the plant. In the silk, if it's corn, in the ear of corn, in the stalks, in the leaves, everything. What it contains in there is a Bt toxin. So I'll just briefly explain. Bt is Bacillus thuringiensis. It is a naturally occurring bacteria that exists in the soil. It is something that organic farmers use as well. It, in and of itself, is not a dangerous product. Organic farmers use it sparingly. They use it as a powder form and spray it on the underside of the leaves, and when soft-bodied insects such as caterpillars, tomato hornworms, cabbage worms, etc., chew on those leaves, they ingest the Bt, and their stomach juices react with that Bt and create a toxin. And that toxin essentially makes their stomach explode. So that's how Bt works. That's, as gross as it is, that's how Bt works. So now what they've done is they've taken that toxin that's created when you ingest Bt, and they've manipulated the DNA of the plants to contain that toxin. So now when insects eat that plant, their stomachs explode. All of the Bt crops, or all of the systemic insecticide crops, are actually regulated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. These are food products that are being regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency.
And the plants themselves are registered as a pesticide, as an insecticide.
So you may have heard some statistics that say, well, since we started using GMO crops, the use of herbicides has gone down. or excuse me, the use of pesticides have gone down is what they say. If they're being really specific and truthful, they'll say the use of insecticides have gone down. Pesticides cover a broad range of things that kill you. So you have insecticides, which kill insects. You have herbicides, which kill anything herbaceous. You have fungicides, which kill funguses, etc. The truth is that they have used less insecticides. Conventional farmers are using less insecticides than they used to because now every cell of the plants they're growing contains the toxin inside of them. So less are being sprayed. But glyphosate and herbicide use has increased 300% since that time. Moving on, other reasons they would be creating GMO crops are to develop other specific traits. So that could be drought resistance. It could be a yield increase. It could be potentially a nutritional element increase. An example of that is golden rice. Golden rice is something that they've been working on for nearly 20 years, and it's taken them that long to actually get a rice that does actually produce more vitamin A that's usable to humans. When they first came out with this golden rice and they were touting it up as a big wonderful thing that was going to save the world, it turns out that in order to get the recommended daily of vitamin A from that rice, you would have to eat a bowl of rice this big. Nobody's going to do that. So that's all to say that a lot of the claims that they're making are just simply untrue. Yields have not increased. Pesticide resistance has. So pesticide, that's not what I meant to say. Pesticide use has not decreased. Drought tolerance, we just had a big drought last year. Most of the Midwest suffered hard. Most of the Midwest is GMO crops. The GMO crops did not do better during the drought, and in fact, studies are showing that non-GMO crops actually do better. And if you think about soil structure, when you blanket spray herbicides onto soil, you're killing all the bacteria in the soil as well. So you're now killing soil. So logically, if soil's dead, it can't hold water. And in a drought, dead soil is going to do worse than living soil. More tests need to be done. So lastly, the patents are really important too, and that leads into the power, control, and money. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but basically in 1980, the patent law in the United States was changed, and the first living form of, first life form was allowed to be patented. So we now can patent life, and that was a bacteria at that time. And now that we can patent life, it's a moneymaker. Everybody eats every day. So patenting seeds and plants and food just kind of naturally came. These are the crops that are resulting from the herbicide-resistant crops and the systemic insecticide crops. These are what are called the high-risk crops. This information comes directly from the Non-GMO Project, which you can get online. We do have a handout that's coming around right now. But if you want to know more about this, that website goes into detail and gives quite a lot more detail than this. But these are your top crops. And notice the percents next to them of the percentage that is grown in the United States. In Vermont, we are sure that there is alfalfa, there's corn, and there is soy being grown here that is genetically engineered. And the quantities are outrageous that are being grown here, right in our little state. Most of these crops are creating ingredients. So the corn that's listed, the third item down, is making things like corn syrup, cornmeal, all the sorts of corn derivatives, and it's also included in that figure is corn for ethanol, so for fuel. So while ethanol might be a better alternative to fossil fuels, it's genetically engineered, so that's something to consider as well. Cotton, fourth ingredient down, is an interesting one because most people don't even think of cotton as something you eat, but actually if you're an ingredient reader, you'll find that many ingredients contain cottonseed oil, and it's usually like an and or cottonseed oil kind of thing. Cotton isn't even regulated as a food, it's a textile crop. So that means that the number of pesticides and the way the land is treated, everything is under a completely different set of regulations than food crops. And food crops regulations are not strong enough, but the textile regulations are even worse. Sugar beets we're not talking about the beets that you buy in the produce department, we're talking about the beets that are grown for their high sugar content. So if you're an ingredient reader of food, you may have realized in the last 5 years or so that what used to be listed as just sugar is now being listed as cane sugar, or other iterations that I've seen as well. And that's companies saying, well, we're differentiating ourselves from beet sugar. At this time, there is no genetically engineered cane sugar on the market. But 95% of the beet sugar beets grown in this country are genetically engineered. And just over 50% of the sugar used in processed food comes from sugar beets. So if you want to avoid genetically engineered sugar, go for cane sugar at this point. Or organic sugar would also give you that assurance. The remaining crops, so alfalfa is basically, as far as we know right now, it's a forage crop. The GMO version of alfalfa is just being used for forage. And what I mean by that is it's going into haylage for animal feed. So it's more animal feed. As far as I know, the alfalfa seeds that this co-op sells, like in the little bulk jars, I don't think that we've gone there yet. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that alfalfa is really just a crop in the field at this point. And it's a scary one. Alfalfa is a perennial. That, as far as I know, is the first perennial, genetically engineered perennial crop, at least in our region. I mean, some of these might be perennials in other places in the world, but after those crops, which are all crops that create ingredients, we have a few raw agricultural commodities, which are foods that look like they should when you buy them. They're still in their whole form. So papaya, zucchini and yellow summer squash, and sweet corn. The sweet corn is brand new. You'll find it in Walmart this season. You may have seen it already, but they're targeting the Northeast. It is a crop that has stacked traits. I'll talk about that in a moment. These 4 items, the zucchini, summer squash, sweet corn, and papaya, look exactly the same as ones that are not genetically engineered. And they're not labeled. So you have no idea if you're buying them unless you're buying certified organic produce. So that is the way to make sure that you're not buying those. The other way is to know that most of the Hawaiian crop of papaya has been genetically engineered, but as far as we know and as far as the non-GMO project is concerned, that's what their website says, that's the only place where they're doing genetically engineered papaya at this point. The sweet corn is stacked, and so what that means is they're taking, that corn has been designed to withstand herbicides, not just 1 but 2, so glyphosate and 2,4-D, and it has a systemic insecticide inside every cell of the plant. So now you have a farmer who gets treated seed, it's treated with some kind of an agent, they put it in the ground, it starts to sprout up, weeds start to grow, they spray glyphosate on it. Well, some of those weeds are now resistant to glyphosate, so they keep growing. So then you spray 2,4-D on it, and that takes care of the ones that are resistant to the glyphosate. And then the corn gets taller and taller, and the rootworms start to come in and eat the roots, and the corn borer starts to come in and eat the top of the plant, and as soon as they chew into the leaves, their stomach explodes and they die. So, I mean, really, it's kind of a brilliant scheme as far as the chemical companies are concerned. So if that's not bad enough, this is some common ingredients derived from GMO risk crops. Again, this is straight off the non-GMO project, and if you'd like to see a longer list of those ingredients, you can go to that website and find them. These are the most common ingredients that you'll see. These are all recognizable things that we're used to seeing in food products. And each one of these, if you researched it back, can be made from corn or soy, pretty much those two. But it doesn't mean that they're exclusively made from those crops. There are other ways to make them too, but companies are always interested in doing what's the cheapest, especially when you're talking about minor ingredients or fillers. So GMO food is the cheapest food out there in terms of, actual out-of-pocket money. So it's more than likely that these ingredients are also genetically engineered. Yeah.
In some organic products, though, there are these, like I always read the ingredient list, and I've a couple of times bought some things I was in a rush, and when I got home, read it, and some of this stuff is on there, particularly like, what's that one? The xanthan gum seems like it's in just about everything, and soy lectin. And I will return that stuff, but the label is a certified organic label for the product.
Okay,
So how is that, are genetically GMO risk crop derivatives allowed into certified organic foods?
They're not.
Okay.
So, and that's an excellent question. Thanks for asking it, and it's a common question. So there is, and I should let Dave answer this because he's...
You've heard me.
All right, so certified organic has a 95%, and then they have a 70% and 100%. The 100% is easy. Everything is certified organic. The 95% says that 95% of the ingredients must be certified organic. The other 5% absolutely cannot be genetically engineered. Genetic engineering is not allowed in any of the percents for anything that holds that circle USDA certified organic. So if it has USDA certified organic, it cannot be genetically engineered.
So they're using these processed fillers, but the source is non-GMO.
That's
Correct. And the way that that's backed up is that those companies using those products, the xanthan gum that's not genetically engineered, need to have affidavits on file tracing it all the way back, showing that it's not genetically engineered.
It's a common question and source of uncertainty about that percent, what's in there, and how about that 5% that's allowed to be not organic in a 95% organic product with a USDA label? What about that 5%? Can that be, it's not organic, maybe it's GMO too, but GMOs are disallowed across the board.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
So how did this happen? Well, as we mentioned once already, that in 1980, patent law was changed, and we began to be able to patent life here in this country. That is not the case in other countries around the world. And once that happened, it sort of changed everything, and it made food be the thing that everybody wanted to own, because everybody eats. So yeah, that's a $2 billion or something like that. There's a revolving door. Have you heard the phrase revolving door? Yeah, I mean, in this context, of course, we all know what a revolving door is, right? Between government and industry. And it's not just Monsanto. They get the heat because they're the biggest company, and they've done some of the most of the stuff. And they're also out there in the world with their name. But they're not the only ones. It's Dow, Syngenta, Bayer, DuPont, BASF. And the revolving door between government and industry is constantly spinning, and it's a real problem. And if you look back since 1980, that's when that really started to become a problem. Consolidation of seed companies, food growers, and manufacturers is also a part of this equation. And if you look at any industry, I mean, this is globalization. They're all consolidating. So this has really made it easy for this to happen very quickly, because these chemical companies that I just mentioned went and bought up nearly all of the seed companies. A very large percentage of the seeds in the world are owned by 5 companies. All 5 of those are chemical companies. The FDA also has this rubber stamp, huge rubber stamp that they just no independent testing or safety approval is required. So any of the tests or safety approvals that are being done by the companies who make these products. And then they're submitting those safety studies to the FDA, and the FDA says, well, we have already said that those foods are generally recognized as safe, which is an actual thing. It's GRAS, it's an acronym. And that's all GMOs are grass. They're generally recognized as safe. Another term they like to use is substantially equivalent. So on the one hand, they're substantially equivalent to the point where they don't need a label. But on the other hand, well, so that's what the FDA says. One government agency says they're substantially equivalent. No label is required. We don't even have to talk about this. No testing is needed. Everything's fine. On the other hand, which is the U.S. Patent Office, another government agency, says those are uniquely different. You should have a patent. So it's uniquely different and substantially equivalent.
Well, it has to be uniquely different for them to get a patent.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yet it's substantially equivalent enough to not need a label. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting paradox. I'm sorry I'm out of this handout. The co-op staff took them all. I didn't print enough. It was my fault. Sorry. But this is available online. You may have, if you're an online person, you may have seen this before. There are different colors of it. Sometimes you'll see it with different people's names on it. But this is one example of a revolving door, and this is just Monsanto. The green section is listing off people's names, and on the right side it's showing you what their job was when they worked for Monsanto, and on the left side it's showing you what their job was when they worked for the U.S. government. Same person worked for Monsanto and the U.S. government. All three branches of our government have been affected by this. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, for instance, was a Monsanto lawyer.
The head of the FDA's food safety division is one of those people.
Same thing with this happened with Wall Street. All the
Oh,
guys
yeah.
at Wall Street.
We're just looking at one little snapshot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. It's a pattern that's huge.
It's a problem
Yeah.
generally in the government, I think everybody.
Yeah, so Michael Taylor, the guy that Dave just mentioned, he was the vice president of public policy at Monsanto, and he's currently the deputy commissioner of the FDA, but at the time, he was the guy that wrote the substantial equivalence guidelines that we still adhere to today.
What do you know about Hillary Clinton's?
Oh, I think she's on there.
She is.
Okay, so here, according to this, it says that she was the Monsanto counsel at the Rose Law Firm, and then, of course, she was the Secretary of State.
This is a big reason why we have to be working on these problems at the state level.
Right.
Because at the federal level, it's very hard to break through some of this stuff.
So this is really hard to read even when you have the handout in front of you. There are a few left, but you can find it online too, and then you can just zoom so that you can really see what it says. But in general, this is showing you the basic consolidation. All of the little blue circles or ovals are little seed companies that we're used to buying from, and they would include even some of the larger seed companies like Burpee, you know. All of those seed companies have now been bought. And these center circles are the owners of those companies. So Syngenta is this one, has bought all of those. DuPont bought all of those. Monsanto, this is why they take most of the heat, because look at their circle and all the things around it. They own a really big portion of the seed supply. So DuPont, Syngenta, Monsanto, Dow, Bayer, and BASF. These are chemical companies or pharmaceutical companies, and they control our food supply. This is the consolidation of food manufacturers just in the organic industry. Yeah.
So, I think about, well, what about the other side? What about organic seeds? And I was thinking about Sylvia
Yeah.
doing their seed saving.
They're meeting right over here. Yeah, well, let me go back to that, because we should have a little positive note here.
Yeah.
This is a good time for a positive note.
I was wondering if you get that.
I didn't promise, didn't I? So,
Throw a joke in.
we are really lucky in Vermont because we have a lot of really wonderful gardeners and farmers, many of which save their own seeds. We have Upper Valley Seed Savers, which is meeting right over there right now. And they're working to help people to save and preserve rare seeds, which is incredibly important. We also have High Mowing, which is a certified organic seed company right here in Vermont. High Mowing Seeds. They're wonderful. They do wonderful things for the community above and beyond creating a really great product. So they're a great company. We also have Fedco Seeds out of Maine. They're a cooperative, a worker-owned cooperative. And they actually, they sell a lot of different kinds of seeds. And one of the things I really like about them, well, they have an amazing seed catalog with great poems and poetry in it, but also they have, they list where their seeds come from. They have a 1 through 5 scale. 1 would be like my neighbor down the road, 2 would be the little farm the next town over, all the way up to 5, and 5 is like a really big company that engages in genetic engineering. They don't sell any genetically engineered seeds, but they tell you when the parent company of the seed does engage in it. So I really appreciate that.
It's very
So they're a wonderful company, and then there's Johnny Select, which is also out of Maine. There's Baker's Heirloom Seed Company. There's actually quite a growing number of very small seed companies that are coming out of the grassroots, and some that have been there for a long time. So they're out there, they're great, and we need more people to grow food on a small scale to be in preserving seeds so that we don't lose all of that.
And there's a whole organic seed industry too,
Mm-hmm.
growing.
Growing organic seeds.
Hey, Kat,
Yeah.
excuse me, can I just ask, does that chart show small local water companies, water providers, or is that just seed?
That was just seeds.
Okay.
That was
How
just
does
seeds.
the water company map would look the same?
I imagine,
Yeah.
I imagine that whatever sector you looked at, you would see a similar pattern, just like with these two. I mean, it's a very similar sort of pattern.
If you look at USGS website, they talk about up to 10 different herbicides being in pretty much all rainfall.
Yeah.
It depends on the state, depends on the growing season. Then EPA tells you how to test your groundwater for all the herbicides in your groundwater. So again, the long-range plan is, buy up small water companies because someday water will be worth a fortune and they'll sell that to you as well.
Someday, not too far from now.
Exactly, isn't it?
It's about this, yeah, I mean, by the gallon. It's already pretty darn expensive. Yes. Well, thanks for adding that depressing note in. Appreciate it.
Very good, carry on.
Yeah, no, it is. I just needed to laugh for a
No,
second.
yeah, for sure.
Does anyone else have anything depressing to say?
It is a really good point. And so this kind of pattern, you can see this all through the food industry, but this is sort of the natural food industry, and because I'm teaching this series of workshops at food co-ops, I focused on this. People started, I mean, most of people who shop at food co-ops are pretty aware about their food anyway, and we've always been concerned about who owns who. But in recent years, there's been a lot of consolidation. And after Prop 37, does anyone know what that is, Prop 37? So that was a ballot initiative in California where they were trying to pass a labeling law through ballot initiative.
Oh, that's right.
And that really sort of changed the game in a lot of ways for consumers and producers and gave consumers a lot of power because the food producers that didn't want foods to be labeled threw in millions and millions of dollars to the campaign saying no against labels. And they did that as Ben & Jerry's, as Unilever, as Kellogg's, as General Mills, as all of these companies said, we don't want labels on GMOs. Well, you know what? People found out about that because it was public information, and they were really upset. They said, what do you mean you don't want me to know what I'm eating? And there were all these consumer boycotts that came from that time period. And that's when people really started wondering who owns who, so that they could vote with their dollars. And that actually made enormous changes in the system and has led us to where we are here today. That ultimately is what led Ben & Jerry's to go GMO free in all of their ingredients. If you're Ben & Jerry's fans, take a stack of coupons on the table over there. They have been really helpful to us in our campaign and on a national level, and also to Washington State. In California, they were not helpful. They didn't know they needed to be, and in fact, they actually received a huge amount of consumer backlash from that. Their parent company, Unilever, gave $467,000 to the No campaign in California. And Ben & Jerry's took the heat for that because Ben & Jerry's consumers are, at least some of them, more aware. And it's a Vermont company, and they've got this bucolic image they're trying to protect, and people got really upset and they started complaining to Ben & Jerry's. Well, Ben & Jerry's said, okay, they went to Unilever, their parent company, they said, you're ruining us, we got to do something here, we got to go GMO free, we got to get the people back. So by this summer, they're going to be GMO free in all of their ingredients. And I said that carefully because ingredients means things you put into the ice cream and mix it up. So like the nuts and swirls and corn syrup and stuff like that. The milk itself is not organic, so those cows are still going to be eating GMO feed.
So not going to be grass-fed cows, it's going to be corn.
Yeah, well, you know, even grass-fed cows eat corn in the wintertime.
Well,
But
alfalfa is genetically modified,
that's true, and that would be
lots of farmers
considered.
buy alfalfa bales, but
That's right. You're absolutely right about that.
This issue of whether or not milk from cows that have been fed genetically engineered feed should be considered, also be considered genetically engineered, has been a big issue in the State House. It's been a big issue in thinking about what is a genetically engineered product. At this point in this bill, the definition of genetically engineered food does not include milk because we can't consider the milk itself to have been genetically engineered just because the cows ate some genetically engineered feed. However, in this bill, just added to the bill in the last 10 days, has been a study, a provision that will require the Agency of Agriculture to take a look at this question and come back and make a recommendation.
Yeah, so everybody's concerned about it. I think a good way to try and understand that is to say if I eat Doritos, does that make me genetically engineered? The answer
Not
is
if you're a pregnant woman and your fetus, whatever you put in that body, when you get that baby. And the difference is that that baby doesn't have the strength to fight off, infections and problems like it might have.
It's true, and the pregnant lady shouldn't probably be eating lots of Doritos anyway, right?
Well, I was getting back to the milk.
So
Yeah.
if you take a look at the science around milk and you try to find GMO substances in the milk, there's very little evidence of it. So that might change in the future. And if it does, the case to include milk and other dairy products under this labeling law would be increased. But at this point, the evidence is so thin that, it's not included. That's right.
Through testing, can they actually find it, or they can't find it?
They can't find
They
it.
can't find it.
There's
We
one
need better
Italian
testing.
study where they found it, but they said it's probably contamination from the environment, so we're supposed to deal with that.
is that because the testing's being done by the companies themselves?
No, I mean, in this case, I mean, we could do a lot more of this testing for sure. And when and if that happens, as I said, we may be revisiting this decision.
And there's enough cause for concern that even our legislature has put in this special provision at the end of the bill calling for a special study on milk and meat products because of animal feed. But basically, as Dave said, there's not enough scientific or legal basis at this point to be able to say that secondary foods that have already been digested by another creature will affect me. And the bill, the way it's written, is that food for human consumption would be labeled genetically engineered or produced with genetic engineering if it itself is genetically engineered. So it starts to get into tricky language. The milk isn't genetically engineered, because the cow isn't genetically engineered, only the food they ate was. Having said that, they are experimenting with genetically engineered cows to produce milk. This is happening in China. I just read a review of or an article that was talking about, they've been doing this for about 5 years, testing this cow out, and the cow was genetically engineered to be able to be resistant to mastitis. So rather than change our farming practices so that we don't make cows sick, we're just going to create cows that don't get the sicknesses that they would get in a CAFO
Well, do the
contained
same thing
animals.
to the chickens, so don't give them
Yeah.
antibiotics.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, they've already
They're living their own
manipulated
feces
chickens.
as it is.
Yeah.
That's why.
So if an animal product has come from an animal that has itself been genetically engineered, say meat, then that would have to be labeled. Right now,
GMO salmon.
right now there's genetically engineered salmon. That would have to be labeled.
Mhm.
If we had genetically engineered beef, that would have to be labeled. If we had milk from a genetically engineered cow, that would have to be labeled.
The other thing I'll point out is that in organic agriculture, if you buy certified organic dairy or certified organic meat, those animals have been fed certified organic feed, which to me establishes that we have an understanding that what animals eat affects the quality of that animal that we're then going to eat, either the animal or their product. So it's been established in the organic sector. So we'll get there. I think we're going to get there. But in order to get a bill that's going to pass, because we've been trying this for 20 years, and many states have been trying this in various different ways, they keep running into these legal fights. And that would have been a legal fight that could have killed the bill. As it is, we're really, really close to passing this bill, and it's a really strong bill. And for what it is, with the milk thing aside, it's going to be a really amazing, helpful tool to all of us consumers that are just trying to avoid GMOs.
It's a good first step.
It is a good first
Really
step,
important
and
foundation.
that's right, and a necessary one. So, yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Well, there's a few things that could go wrong. And unfortunately, we don't really know exactly what's going to go wrong because the tests haven't been done and the products aren't labeled, so we can't really track them well. But as a summary, we're guinea pigs. Since 1996, we've been eating these foods. Even those of us that really try to eat organic or locally grown or grow our own food are still eating GMOs. It's pretty inevitable. If you ever go out to eat, relatives' houses, on and on. There's so many ways for the stuff to sneak into our bodies. And at the same time, since 1996, we've noticed an increase in allergies, food allergies. We've noticed an increase in all sorts of health problems. We've also had a lot of environmental problems get worse. So to say it's all because of GMOs, I don't know. The timing is right on. It's all like since 1996. If you looked at charts of increases in diseases and increases in GMOs, I think you'd see a similar pattern, but the studies have not been done. We need more studies to be able to prove that these things either are or are not safe for humans. These are certainly some of the concerns, and there are more and more mounting studies showing that not only are manipulated DNA or foods that have manipulated DNA potentially dangerous, but the associated chemical herbicides and pesticides that are used increasingly with these crops are also causing us problems. And there's been more evidence showing that recently, that concerns about glyphosate on human health has been, it's a real concern.
I'll give you an example. This will depress you more.
Okay.
Recently when they've done studies, air samples in Iowa where they use the Hopkins stuff, the air samples have a very high rate of containing aerosols of these herbicides. In Europe, they've found at a very high rate residues of glyphosate in urine samples. And just today I read of an independent sampling study done, and the testing was done by an independent laboratory finding significant incidence of these residues in human breast milk. So we're basically, you know, spreading this stuff all around the planet. And I mean, you know, haven't we learned this by now? It's going to get out there and find its way into ecosystems and into things that we eat and touch and breathe. And you know, we should be more careful.
And in case that wasn't depressing enough, a little reminder that glyphosate is actually that chelation agent I was talking about before that pulls minerals and makes them unavailable to plants. Environment, let's go right into that. That's a great subject. Okay, so insect resistance, increased herbicide use. We've talked about that. Insect resistance, I think we talked about that as well. Herbicide resistance, much like the insect resistance, plants and bugs evolve very quickly. They can adapt more quickly than we can to their environments. So they get to a point where these chemicals just don't even affect them anymore. So then we need stronger and more chemicals to be able to combat these pests. In addition to herbicide resistance, which is when a plant can withstand larger amounts of this chemical, we also have something called superweeds. And superweeds are a step above that. So a superweed is like, the best example I can give you is up in Canada, where they used to grow a lot of organic canola, but now they can only grow GMO canola because of contamination factors. Canola is a relative of mustard, which is a part of the brassica family, so that's all your broccoli, cauliflower, collard greens, all of the mustard family, of which there are many kinds of weeds that are mustard family. Some invasive, like garlic mustard, Mike knows all about that one. And the canola and the wild mustard have crossed. So the genetically engineered canola crossed through traditional breeding techniques with wild mustard, just through pollination cross. And now ditchweed, wild mustard, are showing not only to have an herbicide resistance, but they actually contain the gene that allows them to be resistant to that herbicide. So that's showing a genetic transfer between crossing that seems to be persisting generation after generation, which suggests very strongly that you can't recall it. So that's a superweed, and as far as I have been told, there are 14 of these in North America.
And they're now present on 60 million acres of American farmland.
Right, and we also
So
have
glyphosate is not working on increasing acreage, 60 million acres now. So what to do?
right 2,4-D. That's what we do. We just get a stronger herbicide, and we genetically engineer plants to be able to withstand that herbicide, which is what they're doing now. And when we become resistant to 2,4-D, we may just go straight to Agent Orange. Who knows? So in addition to these super weeds, we also have super bugs. So we now have insects that are totally resistant to this insecticide that's systemic in the plants. So what's the next step there? I'm sure they're working on it. We also have harm to non-target insect species, the most famous, the monarch butterfly, and we're hearing a lot about bees. And it can get very complicated when you start talking about all these different kinds of pesticides that are used. There are so many different kinds of pesticides out there that are affecting bees as well. But in terms of genetic engineering, the best story I can tell, I think, to illustrate is on a 10,000 acre farm in the Midwest. You have long rows, and in between the rows you have space for tire tractors and in between the rows. And typically that would be filled with weeds of various species that would attract various kinds of native insects and migrating insects. Well, when you spray large amounts of herbicides on 10,000 acres that persist in the soil and don't allow weed seeds to sprout, you end up with no weeds, meaning no habitat. So monarch butterflies like milkweed, and milkweed is a persistent weed in many fields. Its root system is really intricate and large down below the soil, but it can't ever grow because of the herbicide. So because the habitat's not there, the insects have no place to do their thing. Additionally, monarch butterflies, of course, before they're butterfly, are a caterpillar, a soft-bodied caterpillar, and when they eat the Bt toxin, so it's kind of a double whammy for those guys, and a loss of biodiversity in general of plants and insects as well. There are also economic concerns. We have lawsuit concerns. We're talking about lawsuits for example, the state of Vermont is threatened to be sued. It's more than likely that we would be sued. So there's that kind of lawsuit. There's also the kind of lawsuit where Monsanto would sue a farmer because they were found to have GMO seeds growing on their land and they didn't sign a contract. And regardless of whether it was due to contamination or theft, contamination through wind or contamination through the seed supply or whatever, Monsanto has the right to sue them because it's a patented plant. And unless you sign a contract to be able to have that growing in your field, you've stolen it. And,
That is amazing.
yeah, and they've actually successfully sued 145 farmers according to Monsanto's website.
So you never really own the seeds after you buy them. You know, you're basically getting a license to use their technology. And so you can't own that technology yourself. That is, you can't own the seeds.
Right. The genetic engineering causes all kinds of externalized health and environmental costs. I mean, all of these problems that we're talking about are not being paid for by Monsanto. They're being caused and by biotech industry. You shouldn't just single out Monsanto. It's just fun. So externalized health and environmental costs are huge. We don't even know what all of those are. But now we have a healthcare system that, you know, we all are forced to pay for, but yet the companies that are making us all sick don't have to chip in. Government subsidies, more of our taxpayer dollars. All of the government subsidies that go to agriculture are going to giant farms. They're not going to Cedar Circle Farm. They're not going to Luna Blue. They're not going to any of the small farms in Vermont. If they are coming to Vermont for farms, they're typically going to Farm to School or Farm to Plate or some cool thing like that, but not the billions of dollars that go into tax subsidies for farms are going to farms that grow genetically engineered crops.
So I was reading today to try to understand the farm bill that just got passed.
Oh, wow.
You wrote a couple of years to that.
Right, I mean, I was looking at
Yeah.
it specifically for the cuts to the food stamp and the WIC program and all that stuff, but one of the articles that I was reading was talking about that they're not specifically cutting subsidies to big farms, but I didn't quite understand what was happening, but it sounded like there was some sort of a backdoor cut to some of the subsidies that are going out.
They're telling farmers, look, we don't want to be, we're going to cut back. Yeah, we're going to cut back on the amount that we pay you. We're going to cut back on the amount that we subsidize or support the price of your product, or pay you not to plant the crop. We're going to cut back on all that. Instead, we're going to have an insurance program so that if you have a loss, you will have insurance and you can be made whole, and we will pick up the tab on the insurance basically.
Right.
So it's like, well, it's pretty good, pretty sweet deal. So what farmers have been doing, smart business people that they are, is they say, we'll plant every damn acre we own, even if it's lousy soil. We're going to have a crop failure, but the insurance will pay us.
So what impact
So,
does that have on the big companies that are getting the subsidies for corn, soy, wheat, and rice?
So they make out quite well. I mean, because Farm Bill is something we're involved with every 5 years, and it's quite a feeding frenzy. So.
Good question. Good question.
But they're using the genetically altered
The kind of agriculture, cropping and commodity agriculture that goes on is heavily, soy and corn. That's what, if you drive across the mid part of this country, that's it. Soy, corn and soy. And,
So they're just giving them that false incentive so they can produce their product.
gives them the backstop. I mean, historically, farmers have had bad crops because of weather, things that they cannot control, and it's in our interest to have a stable, food supply. So the rationale for these programs is good. It's just when they start gaming the system and it becomes very well-off producers who may not even they don't know a plow from a whatever. I mean, they may be Manhattan business people who own farmland,
And
and
they're getting subsidies.
they get the subsidies.
Right,
Yeah,
well, I
Doesn't pay
mean,
somebody to do
the
the farm.
70s were, I mean, rightfully through the Great Depression, they're trying to,
Yeah,
they should have ended after that, but with,
yeah.
It was subsidy.
It's an interesting history. Yeah, you know, it's very interesting.
One thing about the government, once they put into something and start it, then that's not.
Well, you know why? Because then there are interest groups. Then you have corn grow, the National Corn Growers Association. They have lobbyists there. They say, what, you're gonna take that away?
Same thing with the military industrial complex, there you go.
There
Everything.
you go.
That's why I say we have to do these things at the state level, because it's a Shark Tank down there. Does that make you feel better?
Yeah, it's supposed to be something short term and ends up going on forever.
Yeah, the hardest thing is to end the program.
So, a couple more depressing things, then we're gonna get on to some positive stuff.
Really?
Yeah, I promise. Devastation to subsistence farmers. It's got to be mentioned. You may have heard about all the farmers in India who have been committing suicide by actually
Yeah.
drinking glyphosate, by drinking Roundup.
Oh my God.
You know, these are farmers that have been saving their own seed for a long, long time, and now they have been forced to use genetically engineered crops and chemicals, and their soil's dead. And they can't save seeds anymore. And they live a very different culture. It's ruined their lives, you know. And so that's just the prime example of that statement, but it's happening on all sorts of levels. The very concept that we're not allowing farmers to save seed is absurd. As absurd as patenting life. The dependency on chemical inputs has just increased dramatically, and it continues to increase, and not just herbicides, pesticides, insecticides, but also chemical fertilizers. Because when you kill your soil, the only way to get your plants to uptake nutrients is to inject them with steroids on a regular basis. And then the loss of traditional crop research and breeding programs. As these seeds are not available to universities, and as universities are bought by these companies, our breeding programs, traditional crop research and breeding programs just kind of go away, and that would be a really terrible thing. That has brought us to so many amazing advancements in agriculture, and to think about losing that is
I'll
scary.
illustrate the Farm Bill problem. The Farm Bill was just signed in January by President Obama. It happens every 5 years. Our organization, with other organizations around the country, has been fighting for 10 years to have some money put back in the Farm Bill that support traditional breeding programs. We have failed.
There we go. So the bottom line, GMOs are under-researched, poorly understood, under-regulated, and yet they appear in over 80% of the processed foods in America. How do we avoid them? We can eat certified organic. We can buy non-GMO Project Verified. They actually have a very rigorous testing for those products, so you can feel assured if it's got that non-GMO Project Verified sticker, it means that it's non-GMO as much as you can be. Certified organic, same thing. If it's got that USDA certified organic symbol, that is an assurance that you're doing the best you can to avoid GMOs. You can buy from a local farmer who you trust that is not using GMOs. As I mentioned before, 96% of the corn grown in Vermont is GMO. Local does not mean better. It just means closer to home, and that's better for a lot of reasons, but it doesn't mean pesticide-free. It doesn't mean your values are being shared with the farmer or anything like that. But the cool thing is when it's local, you can have that conversation with another person.
And we should emphasize, that 96% of corn, that's livestock corn.
That's livestock.
So, the sweet corn that we buy in the market is quite different. Some of it increasingly is GMO. So this bill, just to jump ahead a little bit, this bill would require that if you're standing in a supermarket in front of a bin of corn and you pick out 6 ears to take home, if it was a genetically engineered variety, what would be required would be a sign there that says genetically engineered.
So we want to demand truthful labeling at state and national levels right now. The national level, they're trying to preempt states initiatives. So there is a piece of legislation that was just signed onto by a Republican senator who is going to sponsor the legislation. And this would call for voluntary labeling, which we've had in place since 1996. Doesn't work. And it would also call, like it would actually spell out preemption for states so that no state labeling law could supersede this national law. And so that's what they're doing now. So as far as actions, you want to contact your senators that go to Washington, D.C. to tell them that you do not want voluntary labeling, you want mandatory labeling, and that states should have the right to have their own laws about their food.
It's like bullshit because they keep the Republican Party is all about states' rights and the federal government shouldn't whatever.
Or.
When it serves.
When it serves their purpose, of course.
Except for when it comes to profit making.
I am missing the map, but I have a 64 countries map I'll put here. This is the only one I have, so I can pass it
It's better to
around
get angry
and
than
actually
depressed.
see that.
Absolutely. That's why I don't find any of this depressing. It's important to
They
have
like to
Fuel.
make it on all
That's
sides.
Absolutely.
So there have been labeling bills proposed in nearly half of the U.S. states, and there are also ballot initiatives, as I talked about before, in California and Washington. This year there will be ballot initiatives in Colorado and in Oregon. They're already in the works. And yeah, nearly half of the states. So, to think about passing a federal law that would preempt a law that nearly half the states not only are working on, but have been working on for 10 or 20 years. Since 1996. It's absurd to think that that would be okay. Maine and Connecticut did pass laws with triggers. Labeling is supported by 93% of Americans, according to the New York Times poll. Also, these health organizations and many more. And in Vermont, on town meeting day, the Doyle poll was cast. It's a non-scientific poll, but it's something that Vermonters have relied on, and Vermont legislators look at pretty seriously too. 76% of Vermonters said, I want to see labels on GMOs on town meeting day in March 2014.
And a scientific poll conducted by the Center for Rural Studies at UVM found similar percentages.
And so this is the map that's being passed around right now. You get a little bit better view of it on the map. You can also find that online at the Center for Food Safety. This is about a year old, so it doesn't reflect everything. This color green, these two variations of green are defining places where labeling is already in place in some form or another. The dark green, I can't read it. It's blurry.
Give us the idea.
What is it? 64 countries. The blue, though, are the bans. There are a couple of countries that have banned. Bans are starting to come about more on county-wide or province-wide. There are some counties in Italy. There are some counties in Mexico. There are some counties and areas, GMO-free zones in the United States. So that's how people are starting to work on bans. And there is a pretty solid movement to work on even more bans. Labeling is just no big deal. Food manufacturers change their labels all the time for all kinds of reasons, sometimes totally trivial, sometimes really important. On the right-hand side here, you're looking at the Yellow Box Cheerios label. Who here has heard about the Yellow Box Cheerios going GMO-free? Yeah, General Mills, okay? So this is a big deal. This is more of the consumer boycotts and showing the power that consumers have and the powers that retailers have. The people who buy your food, like at the co-op or at other stores, they talk to food producers and manufacturers all the time. We need them to start telling food manufacturers enough is enough, we don't want GMOs. What happened here is 40,000 mommy bloggers attacked Cheerios. And they were relentless. They went on social media and relentlessly said, I am not buying your products. I will not feed my Cheerios to my 2-year-old kid ever again if you're going to use GMOs. It's unacceptable. We're not doing it. And they would not relent. And finally, General Mills, although they say it had nothing to do with the mommy bloggers, General Mills said, okay, no GMOs.
Yeah, but it
And
says
Yellow Box
underneath
Cheerios.
there, trace amounts.
Trace amounts of genetically modified. Yeah, that's because of
Might be present.
manufacturing and
you know,
shipping.
you can't get away from that.
Yeah, because of shared trucks, storage, processing
Genetic
equipment.
world is sufficiently limited so that we cannot assure 0%.
Well, they would make it, but now
In
you're
fact-
something for something 97%.
In fact, this
And they
bill,
might at some
Why
point.
don't they put
Pressure.
98%, 97%?
no, that's right, they should. And in fact, in this bill that we have has a 0.9% allowance, just recognizing the fact
Oh,
that it's
that's-
impossible to have 0.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's fine.
if you have more than 0.9%,
Oh, that's good.
you're gonna have to label. But if you have very trace amounts like that, you'll not have to label. But it's a simple, practical matter of, you know what? This stuff is all over the place.
Yeah, because our definition of trace amounts and theirs are both different.
Might be very different, you're right, you're right.
So, labeling what is in the food takes a lot less room and less effort than labeling what is not in the food. This is what it took them to say what's not in the food. This is a European label that simply says genetically modified sugar beets corn. A lot easier to say that. But this is the ingredients box up here. This stuff that, Michelle Obama just changed and ignored our request for GMO labeling. Ingredient box is a federal jurisdiction. No state is allowed to enter that box. So our label would be more like this down here. It would be something underneath that box. Cheerios went ahead and did this. Of course, Cheerios are mostly oats. Oats are not GMO. Not yet. But the cornstarch and the sugar in there, and possibly the vitamin E, could have been GMO beforehand, and now they're not. Now the mommy bloggers are going after Honey Nut Cheerios. And right after the Yellow Box Cheerios went GMO-free, Post went GMO-free on Grape Nuts. And right around that same time, Chipotle's fast food restaurant said they were going GMO-free. Whole Foods has said they're going GMO-free by 2018. Everything in the store is going to have to be labeled. This is all happening because consumers have said, I will not give you my money unless you tell me what I'm eating, and I don't want to eat GMOs. So it's important to say that.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know anything is possible, but as far as like Cheerios and whatever's the Post, they really are, they're truly GMO free, or they just changed the wording on the box?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really have the answer, but I have to
'Cause
assume.
I personally don't believe it is.
I have to assume that they really are GMO free, and one of the reasons I'm assuming that is because these companies have been selling to the European market the entire time.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And they sell not labeled ingredients, they sell GMO-free ingredients because they know that in the European Union, where they coined the term Frankenfood, people were not going to buy it. So rather than label, which I think it was a Monsanto CEO who said putting a label on our food is like putting a skull and crossbones on there, they know that and people know that. So rather than label, they source non-GMO. So all of these companies, General Mills, Kraft, Mars, on and on and on, they've got a product for the United States and another one for the rest of the world.
Yeah, M&M's in Europe uses plant-based dyes for their
There you go.
things,
go.
like,
Right.
The other reason I think maybe they're playing it straight here is because there are very simple tests, inexpensive tests that you can run. And I'm sure those mommy bloggers are testing those products. So it would be a very, very bad business move for them to be playing fast and loose with this.
I can say that in case I saw some folks come in a little later than others, so I just want to announce again that just before we started here tonight, I got word that the Appropriations Committee of the Senate passed H112 7-0 out of committee. No trigger. We still have an effective date of July 1st, 2016 without any dependency on any other states. Our senators, it almost sounds like they're embarrassed for Connecticut and Maine to have made such a stupid move to pass a law that doesn't actually say anything or do anything to protect their citizens and sets it up so that it's never going to happen. Our senators were like, we're not going to kick the can. We want to pass a real law. Vermonters are just going to see right through that. So we have a very strong bill. It got strengthened in the Judiciary Committee. It was strong before it went there. We also have now what is called a Special Implementation Fund. So along the way, many Vermonters have said, Lawsuit, come on, I'll give you $20. I mean, they were talking about $10 million. Oh, we need $10 million to fight this lawsuit. Well, if you do the math, that works out to roughly $16 or $17 per Vermonter if you include kids. And a lot of people are like, well, I'll give you my $20 now. Shit, I'll pay for my neighbor too. Here's $40. Well, the senators took this to heart, and they heard it over and over and over and over again, and so they created a special implementation fund. We were all calling it a legal defense fund, but they want to be more clear about it. And the bill was in appropriations for 3 days, which is kind of record fast. It moved through there very fast, and their whole focus was about the language about this fund. How we're going to talk about it, how the money is going to come into the fund, how it will go out of the fund, how it will be tracked, that sort of thing. So we'll learn more about that. I'll probably learn more about that when I go home and check my email. But the good news is there is a fund. The public will be able to contribute to it. But even if that fund does not reach whatever dollar value they put on there, it won't affect the bill. The bill passes independently from that fund, and that's really important. So we have basically everything we've asked for at this point with the bill. Now we need to get the full body of the Senate to vote on the bill, hopefully this coming week. So if you're not on our email list yet, please do get on the email list. We'll send you an update and tell you when to call. We're very good about strategizing just the right moment and whether you should call them at home or at work. And it really makes a big difference. As I said earlier, our senators have received more, and House representatives received more contact on this since anything since civil unions, to the point where they've stood up in committee meetings and said, enough phone calls. We get it. We're going to pass the bill. Please stop calling. You know?
Yeah, right now, in fact, our people in the State House who work every day on this and speak with senators all the time about it, the message they're giving the grassroots is hold up with phone calls for a while, you know.
Yeah.
These people have work to do, they can't be answering the phone all the time.
We're not even calling to thank them.
But they did get it, and
Not yet.
we have to be vigilant.
Yeah.
The other side will be pushing back. It's going to go to the Senate floor next week. Then it's going to take a trip to the House for them to sort of check off on the Senate bill. Then it will go. Then it will be approval by the legislature, and then that bill will go to the governor's desk for his signature and enactment into law. The governor has said he supports labeling. He supports the right to know. But I don't know if you know what Governor Shumlin often does, is he waits until the last minute to see which way the wind is blowing. It may come to pass that we will need to really ring his bells. And if that is the case, that's when, to my mind, that is the next time when there's going to be potentially a real need for some communication. So pay attention to that.
Yeah. So things you can do right now, you can call your senator locally and tell them to vote yes on H112. It wouldn't hurt to call your representatives too, because it's going to head back into the House. We're not sure. The House could decide to concur, which would essentially mean they're like, okay, great. That's what we're hoping for. But the bill has changed pretty significantly since it left the House. So it may need to go back there, and then it'll go to the governors. You can call your senator. You can call the governor. It's not too early to call the governor. His office can handle it, and he needs to know how serious we are. He already knows, but in case he forgot, we need to make sure that he has no opportunity to forget that Vermonters take their food seriously. And the labels are the link to get us the information we need. If we don't have a label, we don't know what we're eating. If we don't know what we're eating, how can we have good health? And if you want me to be forced to pay for health care, you better let me know what I'm eating. Yes. Another thing you can do is you can write a letter to the editor. I'm holding up an envelope that is a self-addressed stamped envelope that will go straight to VPIRG. If you would like, you can write a letter to the editor and send it into your local newspaper at your own pace whenever you want. If you'd like to be a part of our strategic campaign, you can send your letter, take an instruction sheet with you to make sure you list all the right information, send it to VPIRG, and then our partners at VPIRG will place these in your local newspaper at a strategic time. We have been working on 10 letters to the editor in Vermont every week for a while now, and it seems to really be working to create a positive, strong message to our citizenship and also to our legislators. So it really is a very effective campaign. We're trying to keep it positive. We're not engaging with the opposition, but we are seeing that the opposition is feeling the need to engage with us. So we're starting to see more editorials and opinion pieces, not usually from Vermonters, but from people that have been planted to write editorials and opinion pieces that you might see in other states, but they're appearing in our newspapers because they want to try and sway Vermonters. As they did in in California and Washington with the ballot initiatives, and as they did in New Hampshire this past winter, right when the bill was about to get voted on, or when the ballot initiative was about to get voted on, the opposition takes their deep pockets and they throw it at the media, and they say, food costs going to go up. Farmers don't like that. You can't tell farmers what this is going to hurt farmers. And they'll say all of this stuff, which are lies. It's totally not true, but Americans have a short attention span and tend to remember the last thing they heard when they go into the ballot box. And they know that, and it's worked. So you can expect to see in the next 4 or 5 weeks of this session probably a ramp up from the opposition. So keeping your voice in the newspaper is a really important strategy to oppose that without engaging them. I mean, if you really want to engage them, go for it. But it's not worth it because their minds aren't going to be changed. That's not the purpose. They're just trying to incite us to fight amongst ourselves so that they can slide more poison into our lives. So we are at time. I'd be happy to stay after and answer any questions that you weren't able to ask. It's very important to us that you leave here feeling like you got the information you came here for. Please take whatever you need from here and be in touch with us. Send our email list and we'll keep you posted.
Did you talk at all about the amazing outreach that you guys have done on social platforms like Facebook and stuff?
I didn't mention Facebook and social media, so we are on Facebook and Twitter. Over here on Important Contacts, you'll find our website, Facebook, our email, and also the Vermont Legislature website. Vermont Right to Know, GMOs on Facebook. I'm the face behind that Facebook. So I'm typically the person who's doing all of those posts, and we do our best to try and keep up with that. Last week when we had an infographic, which is like a picture that floats around on the internet, it said that we passed out of the Judiciary Committee 5-0, and I looked at that this morning and it had been seen by 250,000 people as of this morning.
It's really important to realize how much reach that you have there, and
really get out
you
there.
just don't realize how strong it is.
Yeah, so like and share, it makes a huge difference. The world is watching Vermont right now. Joe Benning, who's a Republican senator from Caledonia County, who was on the Judiciary Committee, was quoted as saying, Vermont is about to go where no state has boldly gone
I
before.
read that.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Very Trekish.
I was like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah.
I was listening to NPR today when they talked about GMO labeling, and one of the things that came up that I found particularly disheartening was that when a company comes in to fight Vermont on this, they're gonna go, I didn't quite understand all the legality of it, but on a constitutional issue of free speech.
Yeah.
And that, which was laughable, but.
Oh, that's the way it
But when they talked about it, one of the things that you said here is it remains to be seen over time what the effects. We know there's some negative effects, but over time we'll find out. And they talked about the ban on mercury, the labeling for mercury in products and how that held up on a challenge.
That's right.
Because it was proven harmful,
Mhm.
but BGH did not hold up
Mhm.
because it wasn't proven yet. What will be done? This isn't proven yet.
For a short answer, I actually have a handout that talks exactly about why this law is different than the RBGH law, and I have a couple
Okay.
copies. I'd be happy to give you that. But in short, and Dave, back me up if I got this wrong, but in short, the BGH case, two things were very different. One is the state went on this idea of consumer curiosity. We have a right to know, but that's it. They didn't
Okay.
back that up with anything else. And the other is that there was the case law has changed since then.
Yeah.
There have been other cases in other courts that won a similar case. So, and the case law has actually changed since that time. And John Campbell, I heard him on the radio last week. He's our senator, and he's a Senate pro tem. Yep, and he is pro, and he's a lawyer, and he on BPR said about Kinzel, oh, totally different than our BST case. Very different situation. This bill is super strong, and I wish I could defend it. That's what he said.
Wow,
I wish
that's
I could
great,
defend
because
it
in
too.
the beginning, he seemed nervous about even supporting it.
Yeah.
And he's really come around.
He has come around. He's really a strong supporter now, so that's great.
Lots of people have come around, and the reason is, as Bob was saying, grassroots activity. I mean, it's amazing how.
It's a really common question, a really common misunderstanding, but the BGH is very different. So over here on key talking points, which is also on one of the handouts, the state's interest is why this bill is strong. We have taken great pains to have built into testimony and into the findings of the bill that will be voted on that the state has an interest in protecting the health and safety risks, or protecting its citizens from health and safety risks, from environmental risks, and from consumer deception. And because we've documented that, that takes care of that first piece of consumer curiosity. We're way beyond.
Okay.
The state has an
The
interest.
state has an interest in protecting its citizens' health and safety from environmental risks and from consumer deception. Which, that reminds me that there's one important thing about this bill that I think you're really going to like. So some good news. The word natural is the most used and abused word around, and there's some really funny videos about that right now online. You should check those out from Organic Matters. But this bill actually prohibits any product that contains genetically engineered foods to use the word natural, all natural, naturally made, 100% natural, or anything like that.
That's in the bill.
That's in this bill. So we're going to start that precedence. So that's a really
And that's, you know, the legal beagles who have been working on this bill for a couple of years think that that provision is particularly strong. I mean, there's no way the court's going to find that, you know, GMO foods are natural.
Probably the most absurd
Constitutional
thing.
question.
Well, a lot of absurd things happen.
That's true.
Yeah.
The more I think about that, the more I feel like that's so stupid.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah. And other states who are working on similar legislation are using Vermont's legislation as a model. So that's something also to look forward to, is that when other states pass these laws, and in fact, Connecticut and Maine laws are very similar to the law that we began working with as well.
Do we all remember Roger Bannister? Is that his name, Roger Bannister? The guy that broke the 4-minute mile?
Oh, yeah.
So within days, literally days of breaking that fictitious barrier, many other people ran the 4-minute mile. And I often like to look to history, to things that have happened before, to sort of get a sense of what could, you know, happen. And the work that these people have done to make this get to the point where it is admirable. We are so lucky. So,
Well, you've been part of it, Bob.
yeah, well, it's been
Yeah,
fun.
we could not possibly have done this without the support of 30,000 Vermonters that just, God bless you, you won't shut up.
So, well, I'm just hopeful that we can continue to put the pressure on. And what you just said was that other states are looking to Vermont's example and using stuff that we're doing here to help them propel their bills forward. So we're very close to a tipping point.
Yeah.
I had somebody from Northeast Organic Farming Association in Massachusetts. They're working to advance a bill. And when I told them that, you know, we got it out of the Judiciary Committee 5-0, and it looked like we were going to get it through the Senate, the policy director down there said, how did you do this? Why is it working for you? And I said, lots of things, but primarily unrelenting and very well organized grassroots work.
Mhm. We've got some seriously well-informed and articulate Vermonters. It's really, what a great place to live.
And the ability
You are.
to communicate.
You're
So,
Never stayed out
let's just be awesome.
Anyway.
So,
Do you want to know the name of the bill that's being introduced on the federal level, the one that would preempt the states?
They're calling it the dark.
Dark.
The dark board bill or something.
Dark Vader bill.
I haven't heard a real name, I've only heard mock-ups.
I just want to know,
I
because
forget-
I'm gonna call.
I forget the name of the representative who's sponsoring it.
Do you know where I can find?
It's in the House,
information
so
about
call
give
Will.
me a second, I'll see. if
Yeah, are you on social media?
His name is, his name is
Bob's looking
Voodoo
it
or
up.
something.
Bob will look it up.
that?
What, give me what
The
you
one
know.
person that's not on social
It's-
media.
It's dark something.
He's from, his name is, I can't tell you what his name is. It sounds
So
like
cool.
Voodoo or something.
My boss was like, can you do LinkedIn to grow our business? And I was like, no, I have a profile on our website, that's as far as I'm gonna go.
So I'll tell you something about the bill in Washington though.
I'm part of the wrong generation, I think, but.
So it's a voluntary bill. It's a voluntary bill that would preempt state laws, including the one we're about to pass. And it's being pushed by the lobbyists for the Grocery Manufacturers Association and the biotech industry, and they've gotten a friendly senator to sponsor this bill. Somebody, I think he's from, I don't know, I'm gonna say Louisiana. But,
Mike Pompeo, Republican from Kansas.
okay, good. What is it about Kansas? But, but he has, last I knew, he did not have any co-sponsors. No one was interested in putting their name on this bill with him. And some of the, I think the National Retailers Association, which would be grocery stores and stuff, they're not supporting the bill to this point. Maybe it can change, Bob. But the point there is that there's been such grassroots activism and voices around America against GMOs that it's not in anyone's political interest to get on board with this legislation. So I wouldn't panic. It may not go anywhere.